They told us the sky held secrets, but no one ever warned us that those secrets would look back, that they would speak, not in words, but in thoughts, not with mouths, but with silence. And what they said? It wasn't about galaxies or weapons or abductions. It was about us, about our souls, and about something far more terrifying than death itself. It began in the heat, a sweltering July night in 1947. The storm rolled in over White Sands Missile Range like an omen. Lightning cracked the silence of New Mexico's high desert, illuminating miles of barren land. But something else lit up the sky that night. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't stars. It was watching. A radar operator inside White Sands base squinted at his scope. A bright object, moving fast, too fast. And then, another signal. This time from Roswell airfield. Identical, unexpected, impossible. At first they thought it was Soviet. Then they thought it was a malfunction. But when the jets scrambled, F-80 shooting stars tearing into the night, they saw it with their own eyes. An object, metallic, silent. Fast enough to vanish and reappear dozens of kilometers away in seconds. No sound, no trail, no explanation. 3 days later, something strange was found in a quiet ranch field, scattered across the ground like discarded puzzle pieces. Marcel, the officer sent to investigate, described the wreckage in hushed tones decades later. Foil-like materials, paper-thin but impossible to tear, indestructible, yet weightless. And when bent, it returned to its original shape, every time. Science wouldn't recognize this phenomenon for another 30 years. We call it now shape memory metal. But back then, in 1947, no such thing existed. At least, not on Earth. The headlines exploded the next morning. Army captures flying disc in Roswell region. America paused. People whispered. Speculation ignited. And then, silence. Just 6 hours later, a new announcement. It was only a weather balloon, nothing more. The press was called. The photos were staged. And the wreckage? Gone. What had been a national revelation was rewritten as a misunderstanding. But not everyone forgot. In 1978, over 3 decades later, a retired physicist named Stanton Friedman reopened the files. He wasn't chasing lights in the sky. He was chasing paper trails, military records, witness statements, discrepancies. And what he found wasn't just one incident. It was an unraveling. The first person he tracked down was a man who'd stayed quiet for over 30 years, Major Jesse Marcel. He said on record, "What I recovered from that field was not a balloon. It was something not from this world." And he wasn't the only one. Colonel Thomas Dubose, another official tied to the event, later admitted that the press photo of the weather balloon was staged. The real wreckage had already been flown out, under orders from above. And what was left for the cameras was a lie. But this isn't the part they never told us. The real secret, the one buried in whispers and locked behind need-to-know doors, was that something survived that crash. Not a machine, not a drone, something that looked at us. 2 bodies were recovered near the debris site, one lifeless, one still breathing, or so they thought. Because when they placed it under examination at Walker Air Force Base Hospital, they found something they had no words for. It didn't inhale. Its chest didn't rise. There was no heartbeat. And yet, it was alive. Gray-skinned, small, hairless, eyes, enormous, black, unblinking, emotionless, but not dead. And then the dreams began. Military officers, nurses, scientists, one by one, they reported a strange experience. Images, words, feelings appearing in their minds without sound. It wasn't language, it wasn't imagination, it was contact. What began as hallucinations became synchronized across personnel. People with no connection began describing the same thoughts, until finally, a team was assembled. Specialists in psychic research, sound wave analysis, neurobiology. And for the first time in human history, a conversation began between mankind and something not of this earth. The being communicated a concept, not instructions, not threats, truth. And what it said would alter everything we thought we understood about life and death. It never opened its mouth, not once. Yet the thoughts were there, forming in the minds of those standing near it. Some denied it, others dismissed it as trauma. But those who spent enough time near the being began to agree. Something was inside their heads. One word, one sentence, one memory, all from something that was not human. The military moved quickly, not out of panic, but control. An underground chamber beneath Walker Air Force Base was repurposed into a research room. The being was kept there, alive, watched around the clock, surrounded by both doctors and weapons. The first attempt at communication was primitive. Sound wave converters, electromagnetic translators, heart rate sensors, every machine they had, deployed at once. But the machines failed, not because they weren't working, but because the being didn't operate like anything they'd studied before. And then, finally, a voice broke the silence. Not from the creature, from the thoughts of a linguist who had been monitoring it. He said he heard a sentence, not out loud, but clear in his mind. We are not physical life forms. It made no sense at first, but the words continued, drifting between the minds of the specialists like clouds in a sky none of them could control. We do not breathe. We do not eat. We do not sleep. We do not feel pain. We borrow physical form to be visible in your world. The room fell silent. For hours, days. A reality no one was ready for had just stepped out of shadows and into their consciousness, not as a threat, but as a mirror. One of the scientists couldn't hold back. If you're not alive, why can we see you? And again, in that strange mental echo came the answer. You are machines as well. You live through bone, muscle, blood, nerves. Your electricity flows through tissue. You call it life, but it is only a temporary structure. And then, the line that no one would ever forget. Your soul is no different from ours. The silence in that room, they would say years later, was heavier than stone, because they weren't speaking to an alien. They were speaking to themselves, through something not bound by breath or heartbeat. That was the moment everything changed. The being was no longer treated as a subject. It was not an object of study. It had become something far more difficult to define. A presence that understood death better than the living ever could. They asked, "Do you feel sorrow for the others who perished in the crash?" The answer didn't come quickly, but when it arrived, no one moved. Death is a concept that does not exist. There were no further questions after that, only silence. The kind of silence that shifts your understanding of reality, not because of fear, but because of truth. And from that day forward, everything the military thought they knew about life, the universe, even time, began to fall apart. Years passed. The files were buried, witnesses silenced, but a few would remember. and one man, Maximilien de Lafayette, would spend his life piecing it all back together. He didn't claim to have spoken to the being, but he had obtained something that no one else had: transcripts, handwritten by the very team that had spent months in silent communion with the entity. The files described not only what was said, but what was meant. The being didn't come here by accident, and it didn't crash because of failure. It had come as part of something far more complex than surveillance or science. It came because Earth had been chosen, not by them, but by something greater. It said Earth was a proving ground, a kind of moral quarantine zone, a place for broken souls, those who failed to align with the higher rules of the universe, laws that governed balance, compassion, and unity. Earth was not a punishment. It was an opportunity, a stage for growth, one that allowed a soul to face temptation, desire, fear, violence, and transcend it. And because of that purpose, time here was different. The transcripts revealed something staggering. Time on Earth moved slower than elsewhere, not because of gravity, but because of spirit. Every second here was stretched, prolonged, so that a soul could feel, learn, regret, reflect, and choose again. This slowness was not a flaw, it was the feature. The being explained that outside Earth's atmosphere existed a kind of invisible belt, not physical, not electromagnetic, but spiritual, made of plasma energy. Undetectable by current human technology, it surrounded the planet like a seal, and its purpose was chilling. It kept certain souls from leaving, the ones who had not yet remembered who they truly were. It was a cosmic barrier, not to imprison, but to protect, to delay the escape of souls that still operated on instincts of war, domination, and greed. To those reading the transcripts, it sounded like science fiction, a spiritual myth. But as global conflict rose, as technology outpaced morality, and as the oceans began revealing mysteries of their own, many began to wonder, was the seal weakening? Was this being telling us the truth about our own test? And if so, how close were we to the final exam? The questions surrounding the being didn't end when the conversation stopped. In fact, they were only beginning. While the military focused on concealing the Roswell event, a much quieter, more profound pattern began to emerge. It didn't start in the skies, but under the sea. It began with whispers from naval officers, deep-sea researchers, and coastal radar operators. Strange objects were being detected, not flying, but rising. Unidentified submerged objects, not UFOs, USOs. They moved through the ocean as if the laws of physics didn't apply. No propulsion, no splash, no trail of bubbles. They didn't disturb the water around them. Some would ascend from the sea at impossible speeds, rising straight into the air without leaving a drop behind. Naval records noted sightings near the Bermuda Triangle. Chilean fishermen described glowing shapes beneath their boats. Japanese submarines picked up sonar traces of moving objects that vanished when approached. These were not rumors. They were encounters, documented, tracked, then sealed in silence. And when the researchers closest to the Roswell entity examined these patterns, they made a connection that shook them more than anything else. The being had told them Earth was under a kind of spiritual quarantine, a seal that kept certain souls from leaving. But it never said the seal was only above. What if it was below as well? The oceans had always been Earth's final frontier, mysterious, unreachable, hidden, and now, suddenly, alive with activity. But not human activity. Maximilien de Lafayette believed the rise in USO sightings was no coincidence. He argued that these vehicles weren't coming from the ocean, but through it, as if the oceans were being used as dimensional gates, portals for energy-based craft designed to bypass physical limitations. And these weren't just machines. They were alive, or at least conscious. The same energy that had once drifted through the mind of a linguist at Walker Air Force Base was now moving beneath the waves of Earth's oceans. Something was awakening, and it wasn't just watching, it was preparing. Lafayette's translated notes from the entity's communication described a coming phase, a period where humanity would be confronted with a wave of unprecedented upheavals, not just in society, but in spirit. They called it the Great Transition, not an end, not destruction, but a final test. A test to determine whether the souls trapped within Earth's quarantine could remember who they were before the seal weakened. And it was weakening, not because of war, not because of pollution or global politics, but because of choice. The more humanity drifted from compassion, the thinner the veil became. And with that thinning came the surge in sightings. More USOs, more mental transmissions, more people across the world waking up with memories they had never lived, images of beings, skies that never existed, voices whispering truths they had never been taught. It was as if Earth's atmosphere itself had begun leaking awareness, and that terrified the ones in power. Governments classified every case. Officials denied what witnesses had seen. Whistleblowers were silenced, ridiculed, or erased. But one thing they could not contain was the pattern. The sightings weren't random. They were synchronized. Bermuda, Caribbean, Japan, Chile, Iceland, Antarctica, coastal regions that mirrored each other across the globe, as if some unseen force was tracing a map beneath the surface of the planet. A map only the entity seemed to understand. Lafayette proposed something radical. Earth was not just chosen for its diversity, it was designed. Every tectonic plate, every ocean trench, every mountain and magnetic pole was part of a larger energy circuit, a soul purification chamber wrapped in geology. And the oceans were more than water. They were memory. Not human memory, but planetary. A biological archive of every life, every death, every forgotten soul that had ever passed through Earth's test. And if that were true, then perhaps the oceans weren't hiding visitors. Perhaps they were guarding them, waiting for the seal to break, for the souls to awaken, for the moment when the sky and sea would finally speak the same language. And when they do, what would they say? Or worse, would we even recognize the words? The ocean was never the final message. It was only the next page, because just as sightings beneath the waves multiplied, something else began surfacing. This time, it came not from military bases or classified radar logs, but from ordinary people. Children, elders, teachers, prisoners. They began to speak of dreams, but not dreams born from stress or memory. These were lucid, intricate, filled with geometry, unfamiliar constellations, and sentences in languages they had never learned. Some saw enormous cities suspended in light. Others described beings identical to the one recovered near Roswell. Silent, watchful, present, as if waiting for something to be remembered. And these experiences didn't fade with the morning. They remained, etched into the minds of those who had seen them. When researchers overlaid these accounts onto Lafayette's translated notes, they noticed something they couldn't ignore. These weren't just dreams. They were triggered events, catalysts, a kind of spiritual activation. Each dream, each sighting, each underwater anomaly was part of a larger sequence, and the sequence had a goal: to break the illusion. According to the being's message, humanity's greatest mistake was not war or violence. It was forgetting. Forgetting that we are more than bodies. Forgetting that time is not a straight line. Forgetting that death is not the end. The entity claimed that human life was the result of a spiritual fall, not in punishment, but in purpose. A descent into matter, into struggle, into ignorance. Not because we were abandoned, but because the only way to awaken is to do it ourselves. Earth, it said, is the crucible of the sleeping soul, a place designed to reflect every weakness, every fear, every hunger for control, so that it can be seen, confronted, and finally released. But not all souls confront it. Some cling to power, others to pain. Some simply forget they're even here for a test. And so, the seal remains. Not as a punishment, but as a mercy. Because no soul can return to the greater universe still carrying the weight of illusion. The being described Earth's energy field as not just a barrier, but a mirror. One that reflects the soul back to itself in every relationship, every heartbreak, every war, every act of kindness. What we call reality is the soul's own feedback loop, and when enough souls begin to remember, something shifts. The barrier begins to thin, not because of technology, not because of force, but because recognition is the key. Those dreams, they're not imaginations, they're echoes, reminders, but they come at a cost. Because the more a soul begins to remember, the more Earth pushes back. Lafayette wrote that spiritual awakening is not a peaceful path. It is disruptive. It disturbs the status quo of the human system, socially, emotionally, biologically. People begin to withdraw from conflict, to question authority, to feel a strange sense of grief for things they don't even understand. That grief is not madness. It is memory resurfacing. The memory of what we are, beyond skin, names, and time. And as more people awaken to this truth, the global systems built on division, fear, and control begin to crack. The systems fight back. But they cannot stop the internal shift. Because no government, no machine, no doctrine can block what begins inside a soul. And that's what the being wanted us to understand. It did not come here to conquer. It did not come to observe. It came to remind that we were never abandoned, that we are not the center, and that the stars above us are not as far as we think. Because the real distance between humanity and the greater universe is not space, it's awareness. And the moment we remember who we truly are, the seal breaks. In the final pages of Lafayette's notes, taken from transcripts never meant to see daylight, a warning was written. It wasn't a threat, not a prophecy. It was something deeper, a truth. The being said that Earth is reaching a crossroads, a period when the seal, the invisible spiritual membrane that has held the planet in quarantine, will begin to fray. Not because someone is tearing it apart, but because it is time. Time, the being explained, is not a fixed stream. It bends around consciousness. And when enough souls awaken, not just intellectually, but spiritually, the seal dissolves on its own. Not with a bang, but with a shift. And in that shift, everything changes. Not just the perception of life and death, but the very structure of human existence. Politics, science, relationships, identity, it all begins to unravel, not in chaos, but in clarity. This was the part Lafayette feared most, because the being was clear. Not all souls will pass through that threshold. Some will resist, some will deny. Some will choose to remain in the cycle of illusion, fear, and material obsession, and they will not be punished. They will simply be recycled, returned again, to Earth, to try once more. Because the universe does not force evolution, it offers it. And that is the great choice facing every soul alive right now. To wake up, or wait. And time, while infinite in spirit, is limited in form. Earth, as a proving ground, will not stay open forever. The seal thinning is not just about entry, it's about closure. A final window, a last cycle, a moment where all that has been hidden, in the skies, in the oceans, and within the human heart, comes roaring to the surface. That's why the sightings are increasing, why dreams are intensifying, why ancient mysteries are resurfacing, and why, even in a world more distracted than ever, people are starting to ask deeper questions. Who are we? Where are we from? Why are we here? They're not just philosophical riddles anymore. They are reminders, echoes from a being that was never truly alien, but a reflection of what we once were and what we may yet become. The last line of the transcript wasn't spoken, it was felt, and it said simply, "Remember." The door doesn't open when the sky changes, it opens when you do. If this journey stirred something inside you, a memory, a question, a feeling you can't quite name, you're not alone. We are all walking the same forgotten path back to something we once knew and are now rediscovering. At Nexora, we'll continue unearthing the hidden, decoding the forbidden, and searching the edges of truth that lie just beyond the veil. Subscribe, stay curious, and never stop asking. What if everything we thought we knew was just the beginning? Until next time, stay awake, stay aware, and remember, the stars are not silent. We just haven't been listening.